I'm Chris, and welcome back to my channel. Today I'm bringing you another blind shootout, this time of SumThing plugins. If you want to know how to set up a blind shootout in Reaper, I covered that at the beginning of my acoustic drum shootout, and I'll put a card link in here. One thing that has changed since the drum shootout though is that I discovered an excellent blind testing plugin by Hofer that has a free version, and I'll leave a link to that in the description below. You may be wondering what a SumThing plugin is for, why I might want one, and that's a fair question. So let's say you have a bus track in your DAW with a number of subtracks, and you decide to render or bounce that bus track. Blending those tracks together into one track by combining their signals is what is known as summing. Now, I don't want to get over technical here, in part because I don't understand the finer detail myself. If you're interested in the technical details, Chris from Airwindows explains a lot in his blog post and video for his Console 2 plugin, which I'll put a link for in the description. But the gist of it is, your DAW uses a method called digital summing, which is, simply put, adding numbers together in order to combine the signals. The three summing plugins I will be looking at today use a different process, aiming to emulate the kind of summing that would be done when mixing using an analog console. So, this kind of shootout isn't completely unprecedented. Dan Ryle actually did an in-depth comparison of indoor digital summing versus analog summing, and he was using analog summing hardware. Spoiler alert, he concluded that there was no added benefit of using hardware analog summing versus digital summing in the results of his testing. So why bother doing this comparison? Well, I've had what I thought were improvements using Airwindows console summing plugins on my own mixes, and I'm a huge fan of the work of all three developers whose summing plugins I'm testing. However, the nature of these plugins is that manipulating your mix is intrinsically more fiddly than just using your DAW's digital summing when you're using them. So I wanted to know, is it a worthwhile use of my time? Is there any improvement made significant enough to justify the extra time overhead? So the first summing plugin I will be testing is from John at Tukan Studios, and it's called SumThing. Now, unlike the other two plugins, SumThing as well as summing adds some subtle coloration to the sound. So I could make it a fair comparison. I used Burst EQ Analyzer to see what SumThing was doing, and approximated the same adjustments via EQ to match the same curve. To make the testing more manageable, I picked my favorite of the three different desks that SumThing offers, that being desk 3 to emulate, because each of those has a slightly different sound. If I had not done that, it would have been a comparison between 12 different mixes rather than 4. I should note at this point that SumThing is definitely the least time-consuming of the summing plugins to mix with of the three, for reasons that will become apparent when I cover the next two. The second plugin is from Chris at Airwindows, and it's called Console 8. Now, this plugin takes time to manipulate for a couple of reasons. Firstly, its architecture relies on you not touching your track faders. So, no track fader volume, no track fader pan, and so on. And using the volume faders on the plugin itself to instead of the volume plugin, or using, say, track effects if you need to do panning and so on. Secondly, and this is more of an inconvenience than an issue, each track that you are using it on requires two versions of the plugin, one at the very start of the chain, one at the very end of the chain, and it has 3 levels of nesting that are possible, no more. And each of the plugins at the 3 levels is called something different. So 2 plugins per level, 3 levels, there's 6 different Airwindows Console 8 plugins to navigate with. The third one is NCAR or NCAR SE in the channel version by Analog Obsession. And it has a couple of downsides that make it the most time-consuming to manage of the three. Firstly, it has a limit of 8 tracks that can be summed per sort of bus summing sort of track. So when I did my drum bus on my test mix, I needed to actually do 2 sub-buses and then sum those together with a drum master bus, rather than just have one drum summing bus like I did in the rest of them. The other problem is it relies on manual routing between the tracks to be summed and the summing track, whereas the other two cooperate happily with a simple subfolder-based routing like you can do in Reaper. So manual routing is similar to what you might do for a sidechain, except that there's more channels, so you're going to have to do 1 and 2, 3 and 4, 5 and 6, etc., etc. Speaking of Reaper, I also tested a fourth mix, and that one was using no summing plugins, and the only thing that I was doing was also adding the same EQ adjustments to simulate what SumThing Desk 3 does. So I used that as my bass mix, and I very carefully volume matched every single track on the 3 summing mixes to within 0.2 dB with the version on the bass mix. That was to make sure that there was no kind of loudness advantage for any of the mixes, and I was comparing them as absolutely fairly as possible. So what did I conclude from my testing? The first thing was the differences between all 4 were very subtle, extremely subtle. Secondly, when I compared each pair of mixes against each other, I did that multiple times across multiple rounds, one of the 4 of them won more of the matches than any other. 2 of them were exactly the same, won exactly the same amount of matchups, and one of the 4 didn't win any of their matches. Very interesting. So, since the differences were so slight, and the results are what I would call far from conclusive, I'm going to turn this one over to you. I'm going to play the test track, which happened to be a version I did of the Doom E1M1 soundtrack, and I'll alternate between all 4 mixes. I'll be very interested in seeing which one or ones that you like best, whether you can hear any differences, and if you're up for it, which one you think is which. Can you pick which one is the DAW summed version and which isn't, for example? So I'm going to play them now, and they're going to be labeled A, B, C, and D. So, let me know in the comments below what you think. And after this video has been up for about a week, I'm going to post an update revealing which was which. So I'd recommend subscribing to the channel if you haven't already so you don't miss out on that. So thank you all for watching. I hope you found it informative, and I'll see you in a week on the next video.